Hello virtual Padawans. The following is a video of the lab safety lesson I gave in class today. This video is to allow you to follow along with the information and the discussions that I had with my in-person students. I put this video in Edpuzzle so I can track your progress and see that you take the time to watch the video. To get credit for this assignment, you have to watch the video in its entirety. Now you might be wondering, why do I need to learn about lab safety? I'm sitting at home. Well, first of all, lab procedures are an important part of the scientific process, so it's good to know this stuff in general. But also, we're still holding out hope that we might all be on campus again soon. Make sure that you watch the video and read through the lab safety contract because you'll be having a quiz on this on Friday. All right, so on Canvas you have the lab safety contract. What I want you to do is go ahead and put that in Notability. And as we go along, there are certain items that are important, so go ahead and highlight those or put a star next to them. This safety contract is a very generic contract for any science lab, so not all of the rules that are found here are applicable to this class in particular. And this is also set up for like college level science labs as well as high school level. So some of these won't necessarily apply to us either because of just the way that college labs are set up. I went to the University of Florida, so when I took science classes, usually you would take like a lecture class and then you would take a separate lab class. So like when I took chemistry, you would have a chemistry class which was like a lecture hall of like 300 students, and then you would have a separate lab class which was a smaller 20-25 students. Okay, so the labs were actually held in a totally different building. So that, of course, doesn't apply to us specifically, but these rules kind of cover our bases for everything. Now, as we're kind of going through, kind of highlight the important items, I have some of them already highlighted here. Okay. So under general rules, number 1, it says, conduct yourself in a responsible manner at all times in the laboratory. Basically, when we are doing lab activities in this class, the purpose is so that we can learn something from that activity. Okay? There's something to be said about doing things in person. I can show you a diagram of a frog. I can have you do like some sort of VR simulation of a frog dissection, but nothing really substitute actually getting in there with your hands and cutting open a frog. Okay. I was talking to my grandfather several years ago, and he was like, okay, so what do you do now? I said, well, I'm a biology teacher. And he was able to tell me a lot of details about when he dissected a frog when he was in high school more than 50 years prior to that. So there's something to be said about an experience that you remember decades later. And that's the reason why we do labs. Okay? Now, labs are not specifically to be fun. They can be fun, but that's not their purpose. Okay? The purpose of a lab is to get something out of doing the lab that we wouldn't get from just reading it in a book. Okay? So when we do walk into a lab scenario, we need to kind of think in terms of what's the responsible thing that we need to do here. Okay, number 2, which is the second rule, but is probably the most important rule on this list, says follow all written and verbal instructions carefully. If you do not understand directions or part of a procedure, ask the instructor before proceeding. Okay, follow directions. When we do a lab, generally I will give you a set of directions, a set of procedures. It'll often be on the form of a worksheet, but I'll also give you verbal directions as well. Sometimes we'll have to correct the directions that are on the list. I've been teaching at McKeel this is my 22nd year at McKeel, so yes, I am that old. But I've done most of the labs that we will do in class for many, many, many years, or some version of the lab many times before. So I kind of have an idea of what's going to happen when the lab is going on. So I'm going to give you directions as to how to do it successfully. And it might mean modifying some of the written procedures. So that's, at the beginning of the lab, we need to be paying attention to all the directions and anything that we need to change. So if we're looking at the direction that says, okay, take the eyedropper and put 10 drops of water. I might say, you know what, we need 20 drops of water instead to make this actually work. So you need to be paying attention to all the directions that are written down and all the directions that I'm giving you. I've had many, many times where a student will be like, Mr. Wassman, this lab is stupid, it doesn't work. And I'll go over to them and say, okay, what do the directions say? I don't know, haven't read them yet. Well, that's why it's not working, is because you're not following directions. Okay. All right, item number 3 doesn't really apply to us, but number 4, when first entering a science room, do not touch any equipment, chemicals, or other materials in lab area until you are instructed to do so. When you walk in, I may have equipment already set up, and in some cases I spent all morning or sometimes the afternoon previous setting up that equipment for this lab. Okay, so if you walk in and immediately start playing with whatever's sitting out, okay, you might undo that hour or more of me setting stuff up. Okay, so please just leave everything alone until I tell you to do so. Even if it's something that you think you know how to operate, like next week we're going to be using microscopes. If you walk in and it's like, oh yeah, I know how to use a microscope, and you start fiddling with the microscope, okay, I've had plenty of times where students go, yeah, I already know how to use the microscope. Mr. Wassman, it's not working, and I walk over and flip the switch to turn on the light. Yeah, you really do know how to use that microscope. Yeah, so just kind of wait for instructions before you get started. The other thing to note is I do have an AP biology class, 6th period, so it is quite possible that the equipment that I've set up is not for you, it's for that class instead. So I don't want you messing with that and undoing setup that I did for another class as well. All right, number 5, do not eat food, drink beverages, or chew gum in the laboratory. Do not use laboratory glassware as containers for food or beverages. In general, at McKeel, you shouldn't be eating or drinking in the classroom. In a laboratory setting, which this classroom is also a lab, you shouldn't be eating or drinking just in general, because quite frankly, you never know what has last been on the desks in here. If my previous class was doing a dissection and you're sitting there munching away on something, okay, you might be getting the frog juice left over from the previous class on your food and now in your mouth. Okay, not a fun time. And even if we as a class are not doing anything that may be lab related, again, you don't necessarily know what my AP class has been doing, so it's never a good idea to be eating or drinking anything in a lab setting. Now, the only exception that I will make to that is if you have a water bottle, and it needs to be a water bottle that has a seal on it, and if it's like a Yeti cup or something like that, that's fine. You're allowed to have water. Anything else, Gatorade, Powerade, soda, juice from the cafeteria, whatever, I should not see out. Okay? If it has a lid and you can seal it shut, put it away in your backpack. Okay? Now the question of, well, why can I drink water and not Gatorade? Well, if you spill water, it's pretty easy cleanup. If you spill Gatorade, then we have a sticky mess all over the place. Okay? And then it attracts ants and cockroaches and all sort of fun friends to spend time in class with us. Okay? It says do not chew gum. The McKeel policy has changed where, yes, you may chew gum in the classroom. And I personally don't like to chew gum, but if you want to chew gum, I'm okay with that. However, there is a provision. If you are chewing gum, that gum, when you are done with it, needs to go in the trash. I have a trash can on the side here, and I have a big trash can in the back. Okay, that's where used gum goes. For whatever reason, some students seem to think that, oh, when I'm done chewing this gum, that I can just, that's a good place for it, or this is a good place for it, or under my chair is a good place for it. No. Okay, you should not be sticking your gum or spitting it out on the floor or whatever else. Okay, why would I want the disgusting rubbery wad of spit that you just took out of your mouth anywhere in my classroom other than the trash? Okay, so I'm fine with you chewing gum, but the first time I find gum stuck to something after this class, then this class will no longer have the privilege of chewing gum. Okay, so keep that in mind. All right. Number 6, this goes along with following directions. Not only should you follow directions, you should not be doing anything that's not in the directions. So it says, perform only those experiments authorized by the instructor. So I have plenty of times where students are getting creative and saying, well, what would happen if I did this? If I took this chemical and mix it together, what fun happens then? Okay, that is never a good idea in a lab setting, because if you don't know what the outcome is going to be, then the outcome might be dangerous. Okay? You always need to assume when you walk into a lab that there is a potential for danger. Okay, on second period. So on Thursday, we're going to be doing a lab using spaghetti. Not terribly dangerous, I would say, but if you walk into a lab assuming that something could go wrong, then you're going to be more aware, you're going to be more cautious than if you were like, it's just spaghetti, don't need to worry. Okay? And if you treat every lab, if there's a potential for danger or injury, then you're less likely to make mistakes when there is actual potential for danger or injury. Okay? So you never want to do anything that you haven't been explicitly told, hey, you need to do this, because you never know what could happen. If you go next door into a chemistry lab and you mix two chemicals and you're not quite sure what's going to happen to that chemicals, it could explode, literally. Okay? Mix two chemicals together, you might create toxic gas that could kill you. Okay? So you never want to just like throw together anything. I mean, most of the experiments that we do in here, again, not terribly dangerous, but if you don't know, then don't do it. Now, if you're curious about something, couldn't hurt to ask. I've had students do that before. It's like, Mr. Wassman, what would happen if I did this? And I might say, go ahead and try it. Because I know what the results will be. Because, again, I've done most of these labs before, so I'm pretty sure that I know what would happen. And if I didn't know what was going to happen, I wouldn't let you do it. Okay. All right, skipping down to number 8. Never fool around in laboratory. Horseplay, practical jokes, and pranks are dangerous and prohibited. Okay. Again, labs are not supposed to be fun time. You're supposed to be learning something from the lab. So if you're not entertained, it doesn't mean that you have to jazz things up by start joking around. Okay. And that's because someone has the potential of getting hurt. And in my experience, it's not the person that is playing around or doing what they're not supposed to that gets hurt. It's the person sitting next to them that gets hurt, or somebody around them that gets hurt. They start causing trouble, and then it's everybody around you that is in danger. Okay, so I expect everybody to act responsibly, because not only does that protect you, but it protects everybody else in the classroom, including myself. I don't want to get injured because somebody is doing something stupid. Okay. And you may not think it's something that can hurt somebody. Like, hey, I have this dead frog and it's kind of funny and I'm going to stick it in this person's face and that's going to startle them. Well, if someone gets startled and they reel back, they could fall back and hit one of these lab tables and crack their skull open. Okay. That funny joke, all of a sudden not funny anymore. And if you don't think it could happen, let me tell you, I've had it happen before. Okay, and in possibly the most ridiculous manner ever. We were doing an activity. It was a poster activity. Students had paper and markers, and they were sitting at their desks, and I was at my desk, and another teacher walked in and was asking me a question, and I was talking to that teacher, and I had a student walk up to my desk and go, Mr. Wassman, I hurt myself. And I look over, and blood is dripping down his arm, and I'm like, what happened? You were using markers. I fell out of my chair. Okay, how he fell out of his chair, I don't know, but he did. He fell out of his chair, hit his head on the side of the desk, split his scalp, and started bleeding. And he was like, should I go to the clinic? Yes, you're bleeding. Go to the clinic. So he dripped his way to the clinic. Yeah. Even an activity you don't think is going to be potentially dangerous somehow can end up that way. All right, moving on. Number 9, observe good housekeeping practices. Work areas should be kept clean and tidy. Okay, when you walk into my classroom, when you walk into a lab situation, the room will have been straightened up. My first period will have come in and they've done their lab, but they will have cleaned up after themselves. If you walk in and there's a mess at your station, then I want to know that because I'm going to hold my previous class responsible for that. Okay? But when you're done with that lab, you're going to clean up everything and leave everything as clean and tidy as you found it. Okay? Because my next class doesn't want to have to walk in and deal with your mess, okay, in the same way. Okay? And if I find a lab table is left messy, anybody sitting at that lab table is going to get an infraction for not following directions. Generally, when we do lab activities, it's going to be on block days. So I'll give you plenty of time to clean up, so it's not like, okay, I'm rushing to clean up and running out the door to get to my next class. I will give you plenty of time to get everything straightened up and cleaned up and put away before we're ready to go. Okay. Right. The next one, number 10, keep aisles clear, push chairs under the desks when not in use. There are some activities where we're going to need to get up and move around. And in those cases, please just push your stools close to the desks, move your backpacks out of the way, because as we're up and around, moving around, we don't want to trip over things, especially the in-between parts of the desks. Those are very crowded at times. And let me tell you, I trip over backpacks all the time as I'm walking up and down in my classroom. So if I kick your backpack, it's unintentional, but just keep in mind that if we have a bunch of people moving around, it's going to happen a lot and someone could trip. All right, number 11, know the location and proper procedures where appropriate for all safety equipment, including first aid, eye wash station, safety shower, fire extinguisher, fire blanket. Know where the fire alarm and exits are located. Okay, so we don't have much occasion in a biology class to use fire, but if by chance we are using fire, we do have a fire extinguisher located over here. Okay, if a fire breaks out, do not take it upon yourself to use the fire extinguisher. Okay, because if you don't know how to use that fire extinguisher correctly, you could actually spread the fire. Okay, and in the zombie college video, there was a funny moment where the one girl sprayed the guy with the fire extinguisher. Yeah, that wouldn't be funny in real life because those things can actually cause chemical burns. And if the chemicals that are coming out of that fire extinguisher gets into your eyes, it could blind you. Okay, so we don't need to be dousing somebody with the fire extinguisher if we don't have to. And in fact, if somebody is on fire, what do? Stop, drop, and roll. You were taught that in kindergarten. Okay, and in the back, there's a big orange square that says fire blanket. That's a fire blanket. So if someone were on fire, that would be the better option to grab that and smother the fire. And in fact, if there was a fire in this classroom, I would go for the fire blanket first, okay, before I go for that fire extinguisher, because that thing is going to be far more messy and problematic than the fire blanket. And again, this is a biology class. We're not going to have much occasion for setting things on fire. Go next door into the chemistry class if you want any of that. Okay. We also have an eye wash station over here on this side of the desk. If by chance you get something in your eyes, the proper procedure, you come up to the front of the desk, you push this button down. I'm not going to do it because it splashes all over. And you're supposed to put your face into the eye wash station for 5 minutes and let the water run through your eyes as you're washing out your eyes. And 5 minutes seems like a long time, but if you have something in your eyes, you're not going to be worried about how long it takes. And I've had a student have to use the eye wash station before. We were doing a dissection and it wasn't really anybody's fault, but the preservative that is in the dissection specimen is mostly alcohol-based, and it squirted up and got in her eyes. Yeah, it didn't feel pleasant, so she had to come up and use the eye wash station, and it splashes quite a bit. So when she was done, she was soaked from here down, and everybody was like, "Whoa, you're soaking wet," and she was like, "I don't care, that hurt." Okay. So yeah, if you really have something in your eyes and you need to use the eye wash station, you're probably not going to be too worried about splashing a little bit of water and how long you have to rinse out your eyes, because you're more concerned with how much it hurts. Okay. Yeah. Alrighty. Next one, skipping down to number 13. Be alert and proceed with caution at all times in laboratory. Notify the instructor immediately of any unsafe conditions you observe. Okay. When we're doing a lab, you need to just be aware of what's going on around you. What are you doing? What is the person next to you doing? Okay, because again, generally when somebody gets hurt in a lab, it's not the person that was doing something stupid that gets hurt. It's the person sitting next to the person doing something stupid. Okay, so you always want to be paying attention to what you are doing, but also be mindful of what the people around you are doing. Okay, if we are doing a dissection and someone has a scalpel in their hand, okay, if you're anything like me and you tend to talk with your hands and move your hands around a lot, you don't want that scalpel to just go flying around because somebody's going to get hurt. And if somebody else around you is moving that scalpel around, yeah, you probably want to back away and then let me know. If you see somebody doing something they're not supposed to be, then let me know and I'm going to stop them. Okay. Now when it comes to horseplay, practical jokes, doing unsafe behaviors, okay, I'm going to give you an infraction for not following directions. But if it's a very egregious act, like you're doing something really stupid or really dangerous, then I'm not just going to give you an infraction, I'm going to give you a referral, send you up to have a nice conversation with Miss Green. That means you're out of class, because that means I've decided you just can't handle this lab and you are not going to finish it, which also means you're going to get a 0 for that activity. Okay? So as long as we conduct ourselves properly, then everybody should be safe and everybody will be happy. All right. Number 14, dispose of all chemical waste properly. Never mix chemicals in the sink drains. We don't have too much occasion to use dangerous chemicals in here. Periodically we'll use kind of household stuff like vinegar or whatever. I will always give you directions as to how to dispose of materials. So if we're doing an experiment that has some sort of liquid, I'm going to tell you, yes, you can dump that down the drain, or no, we need to put it someplace else. Okay, when we do dissections, the remains of the dissected specimens we usually put in a separate bag, but I will always tell you how to clean up and how to dispose of things. Okay, again, in this class is not as important, but when you go next door and you're mixing chemicals together, there are some chemicals you can't put down the sink because those chemicals will dissolve the pipes that hook up to the drain. Okay, so you never want to do that. All right. Skipping down to number 17. Experiments must be personally monitored at all times. Okay, if you're working on a lab, that's what your focus should be. Okay, you shouldn't be up and about, moving around, bothering other people, getting into their labs. Okay, you need to be focused on what's in front of you and your task at hand. Okay, now there are occasions where I might go to a lab station and say, hey, you guys are doing really good. And I might tell the class, hey, if you want to see how this is supposed to work, or if you want to see something really cool, come check out this lab station. So I might, at that point, say, okay, let's poke our noses in what these people are doing. Okay, but we don't want to disrupt anybody else's lab because we don't want to prevent them from being successful in the lab and completing their tasks. Now, the nature of experimentation is sometimes the experiment doesn't work. And that's part of science, is sometimes the experiment fails. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Okay? But to be successful in a lab activity, you need to be following the procedures. And again, most of the activities we're going to be doing, I kind of have an idea of what the outcome should be. And then if the outcome doesn't work the way it's supposed to, then we can try to figure out what's going on and what's going wrong. Okay. Alrighty. Number 20, handle all living organisms in a laboratory activity in a humane manner. Okay, this is a biology class, so we are talking about life. And there are some activities that we will do where we have living things in here. Okay, now it's not going to be anything too fancy. We might have some worms or mealworms or something like that. But if we are dealing with living things, then we need to treat those living things humanely. One of the things that I would hope you would get out of a biology class is a better appreciation for life. And a better appreciation of life would mean that you treat living things kindly. Now, when it comes to preserved biological materials, you're supposed to treat them with respect and, of course, dispose of them properly. Okay, just because it's a dead frog doesn't mean that all of a sudden we can be disrespectful to that dead frog. I mean, we're using it for a purpose. We're trying to learn something from doing a dissection, not just happily cutting up something dead. Okay? And that, of course, gets into the kind of horseplay and just using that dead specimen for some jokes and some pranks rather than actually learning something from it. All right, number 21. When using knives and other sharp instruments, always carry with the tip pointing downwards and away. Okay, if this pencil is a scalpel, okay, we want the tip of that scalpel pointing away from your body, because if it's pointing towards your body and you slip, that's going into you. Okay, and you want it pointed down, because if you're holding it up like this and you bump into somebody, you're stabbing them. Okay, that would be bad. Okay, so you always want the tip down and away from your body because you're less likely to injure somebody that way. Okay, obviously you shouldn't be wandering around carrying a scalpel or running with scissors or anything like that. And I'm always surprised how many students seem to never have held a knife before and don't seem to know how to handle it. If you're cutting, you cut away from yourself. You don't cut towards yourself because if you slip, that's going into you. Okay. Also, if someone asks you, hey, could you hand me that scalpel over there? You don't hand it to them point first. Okay, because if they're not paying attention, they reach out and grab it, they're grabbing the sharp end of the scalpel. So what you do is you flip it around and hand them the handle. Okay, so they're grabbing the handle and not grabbing the sharp thing. Okay. And I can tell you, as a biology teacher, we use scalpels because we're doing dissections, and I've had some teachers say to me, you're crazy giving a bunch of teenagers scalpels. Okay. The thing about it is a scalpel is just a tool. And if we're going to do something like a dissection, we need the proper tools. And it's me giving you a great deal of responsibility, but if you can show me that you are responsible enough, then we will do those activities. If you show me, hey, I can't handle it because I'm too immature, then we'll find other things to do with our time. All right, skipping down, number 25, dress properly for lab activities. This doesn't necessarily affect us too much because obviously we're going to be wearing our school uniforms. However, there are some times when we may need to wear safety goggles. If I tell you you need to wear your safety goggles, you need to put them on and leave them on, much like how you're being told to wear your mask and leave it on. If we're doing something that might be a little bit messy, we have some lab aprons that we could cover up our uniforms with. But generally speaking, you want to wear clothing that is appropriate for the activity that you're doing. The other added thing here, long hair must be tied back and dangling jewelry, loose baggy clothing must be secured. Okay, if you have long hair, it's always a good idea to have like a hair tie handy because if we're doing a lab, you probably want to tie it back. Okay. Again, we don't do a lot of fire in this class, but hair is very flammable. If you lean over and your hair falls into flame, it is likely to catch on fire. Okay, but the thing that happens most often in this class is we'll be doing like a dissection, and somebody with long hair will lean over and their hair will fall right into the frog guts. And then you get to walk around smelling like frog guts for the rest of the day. So again, I would suggest having a hair tie that you can tie your hair back in that instance. Okay, how much time? Ooh, we got 10 minutes. All right, number 27. Report any accidents, spills, breaks, etc., or injuries, cuts, burns, etc., to the instructor immediately, no matter how trivial it may appear. If something happens, I want to know right away. And I get it that accidents happen, and when they do happen, we'll deal with them. But if something happens because someone was not doing what they're supposed to, then obviously there will be consequences that follow. But if somebody gets hurt or if something breaks, then I want to know about it right away. And especially if something like glass breaks, please don't try to just clean it up yourself, because I would rather I take the time to clean it up than run the risk of you cutting yourself on broken glass. Did you have a question? If it's like a particularly dangly necklace, then yeah, I mean, you can probably just tuck it into your shirt. The idea is you don't want anything loose getting in the way of what you're doing. Okay. Again, we're not likely to be doing anything where you're going to get too tangled, but the hair is kind of the biggest thing because some of you have really long hair. So as long as you can get it out of the way so it's not interrupting what we're doing in the lab, then it should be fine. Okay. All right. Where was I? Oh, yeah. If something happens, if you get hurt, please let me know. I do keep Band-Aids in my desk, so if you, yeah, I can give you a Band-Aid. But if something happens, I would rather know than you try to hide it from me. Okay, because quite frankly, an infraction is a minor thing because you weren't following directions versus like a serious injury that you're trying to hide. Okay, and trust me, I've made mistakes before. I've broken glass. There was one time I was putting away some glassware and a beaker slipped out of my hand. And it felt like it was slow motion as I watched it fall to the ground. And I thought to myself, gee, I hope that doesn't break. And it hit the ground and obviously it shattered. So, I was picking up glass. Okay, it happens. Mistakes happen. But when they do, please let me know. Okay. Going down to the last section here at the bottom, number 31, handling chemicals. All chemicals in the laboratory are to be considered dangerous. Again, we don't use too many serious chemicals in this class, but if we always consider the chemicals we're using as dangerous, then we are going to treat them with the proper level of respect necessary. Okay. And there's only one lab I can think of where there's really only a few chemicals we need to worry about. But even those are just basic household chemicals. But there are some household chemicals that you might have in a cabinet or a cupboard at home that are potentially dangerous if you don't treat them properly. Okay. All right, flipping to the back side, going down to number 37. Handle flammable hazardous liquids over a pan to contain spills. Never dispense flammable liquids anywhere near open flame or heat source. That's kind of common sense. If I have alcohol or gasoline or something like that, I don't want to be playing around fire with those. Okay. Again, we don't have much occasion to use fire in this class, but who knows? Someday I might get creative and be like, hey, here's a really cool new experiment that we can do. Also, some people are not aware of how flammable some things can be. So even though we were not intentionally trying to make fire, you could potentially make fire if you're not careful. Okay. Number 38, never remove chemicals or other materials from the lab area. Okay. Again, not too many chemicals in here, but you don't want to just take things from a lab. Okay. And I don't know why this was a fascination at some points, but I've had students try to take parts of dissection specimen out of the classroom with them. I had one student that took the stomach out of a frog and stuck it in his pocket. Like, why would you want that in your pocket, first of all? And then, of course, the next thing is he decided he wanted to throw it at somebody in the cafeteria. Okay, so yeah, he got in trouble for that. Okay, but then the principal walks in the door and says, Mr. Wassman, why are students walking around with frog stomachs in their pockets? Okay, yeah, I don't want to have that conversation with my boss. Okay, so obviously anything that's in the lab needs to stay in the lab unless I say, hey, you can take this with you. Okay, and if you're asking, can I take like the frog stomach or the frog brain or like a worm with me? No, the answer will be no. Okay. All right, the next section, handling glassware and equipment. Obviously, glass can break. Okay, so we need to be careful anytime we're using glass. We have some glassware that we will use. The most common piece of glass that we will use in this class, we'll actually use them next week when we use the microscope slides. They are little pieces of glass. And when they break, they are notoriously sharp. Okay, so if you see any broken glass, okay, if anything is chipped or cracked, that's number 41 here. If you see any broken glass, please let me know. It may have cracked or chipped or something and I may not have noticed it, or possibly somebody broke it last class period and just decided not to tell me because they didn't want to get in trouble. But the important thing is we don't want to cut ourselves on glass pieces. Okay, that's no fun. Okay. Skipping down to number 46. Report damaged electrical equipment immediately. Look for things such as frayed cords, exposed wires, loose connections. Okay. When we have to plug in electrical equipment, if the power cord just doesn't look right, if it looks damaged, please let me know. In some cases, there are quick fixes we can do, but in other cases, like, oh yeah, that shouldn't be that way, we are not going to use that piece of equipment. If anything that we're using in class doesn't seem right, okay, ask. Okay, if it's not working properly, ask. Because it could be a simple fix. It could just be, yeah, we know that's slightly broken, but it still works, we can still use it. But sometimes, I just don't know because people haven't told me yet. Okay. All right. Next section on heating substances, number 49 and 50. Talking about basically taking care when you're around fire. Okay. Again, it always surprises me how many times students seem like they've never been in the kitchen before and never seen like a hot stove or anything. But one of the most common and most ridiculous thing that I will see is someone will like look at a hot plate and say, "Is this thing hot?" And they reach out and try to touch it. Like, well, if you're wondering if it's hot, and why would you touch it? Because you're just going to burn yourself. Okay, so obviously, anytime we're dealing with heating something or fire, we need to be careful with that. Really, the only thing we'd be doing in here periodically is heating up water, and I just use the microwave for that. So we're not really going to be doing a whole lot with fire or hot plates or anything like that. But again, you never know. I might get creative. We might come up with a new lab that I've never done before. So the situation might arise. Number 52 and 53, again, going about heating stuff. Something important, number 52, heated metals and glass remain hot for a long time, and they don't look hot. Okay, glass that is hot enough to burn you doesn't look hot. It's not like glowing red, it's just there. So if we've been heating stuff, if steam is coming out of something, then you can assume that it's hot, and you want to be careful with that. Okay. And something else is a lot of people, they've boiled water before because they've made spaghetti or whatever. Steam can burn you just as easily as boiling water. So if there's steam coming out of something, you don't want to be sticking your face in it, okay, because that could scald you. Okay. Again, this is common sense sort of stuff that I would assume you already know, but I'm always surprised how many students act like they've never been in a kitchen before. Okay. All right. So those are kind of the most important things that are relevant to our class. There is a Canvas assignment for you to sign and for your parents to sign the safety contract and then submit that, okay, and that's due by Friday. The information that's on this lab contract, we will be having a quiz on Friday, so please make sure that you're reviewing that information. All right, have a good day. I will see you tomorrow.